I will not describe all the participants. You can read the information in the materials which I attached to our proceedings. I want to start with giving the word to Mr. Erdinch Mert. His speech concerned the year of COVID and pandemic. We have already discussed partly this item. However, it's very interesting to hear your vision of such situation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Erdinch Mert. I'm the founder and managing director of BeNova Consulting. First of all, it's a great honor for me to be here amongst you. It's a privilege to represent and speak on behalf of thousands of international government professionals. I would like to briefly introduce myself and talk about my experience in government relations, just a short introduction. I started my business life in Aselsan. Aselsan is one of the biggest defense industry companies in Turkey. I had the chance to manage many big projects there, and in the last 2.5 years, I worked as business development manager responsible for the Asia-Pacific region. During this period, I had the chance to manage relations with 18 different countries on behalf of my company. After that, I started working for global management consulting firm McKinsey & Company as public and social sector associate, and also I had the chance to consult on many public projects there. And last year I established my own consulting company, and as BeNova Consulting we provide consultancy services especially for the public and defense industry sectors. So first of all, I have to admit that lots of things have changed because of COVID-19. Having emerged in Wuhan, China in December 2019, it soon became a global epidemic, and we observed radical change in the field of government relations. The concept of social distancing entered our lives in this period, and we encountered travel restrictions and even curfews in our lives. Supply chains were disrupted, customer demand fell in some sectors, and health regulations forced a change in the way business is conducted. One of the most important changes that we have observed was that working from home has become much more intense, and we had lots of Zoom meetings in our lives in the pandemic period. Although working from home has made life easier in many ways, it has seriously disrupted areas such as government relations and lobbying. As I mentioned before, I worked as business development manager and managed all the relations of my company in 18 different governments, with 18 different governments. And I'm sure it would be much more difficult to manage these relations without face-to-face meetings. So it was a chance for me to have face-to-face meetings with all these 18 governments, because with Zoom meetings, with online meetings, it's not so easy to manage the relations. Social distancing has dramatically reduced opportunities for face-to-face lobbying, of course. And even though our way of doing business has changed, lobbying expenditures continued to increase globally during the pandemic period. It's a good thing for lobbying, of course, because the pandemic situation did not affect the expenses. And as in the first panel it was discussed, the United States made the largest lobbying spending in its history during the pandemic period. And also with the effect of the 2020 election, it's estimated that more than $2.9 billion were spent on lobbying during this period. On the other hand, when we look at our own country, to Turkey, we observe the opposite of this situation. Our lobbying spending was low, but after 2018, it declined about 50%. And in 2020, it was about $3.1 million. And to give the figures, it was more than $6 million in 2018 and $4.4 million in 2019. So we can easily see that the low lobbying spending has continued to decline because of the pandemic situation. And just to compare, one of our, I can say, one of the countries like Saudi Arabia, annual expenditure is more than $50 million still in the pandemic situation. So we can easily observe that our country, Turkey, does not give necessary importance to lobbying. And we don't have enough budget for lobbying. And when we look at the economic effects, we see that the isolation created by COVID-19 has deeply shaken economies at both national and global levels. The effect of the pandemic on the economy in the medium and long term forced all countries to take urgent and permanent measures regarding economic policies. Although many countries, especially again the United States, define the pandemic as fighting the war, we have all clearly seen that this war is a different one, and weapons have not worked in this struggle. So it was a new case for all of us, and COVID-19 has shown the world that we were unprepared for the epidemic threat, and most of the countries' crisis management capacities were very weak. Global outbreaks have affected international trade and travel, of course, and that caused economic consequences in all of the countries. It's estimated that the coronavirus pandemic has cost the world's economy an additional $15 trillion until now. And this figure is expected to exceed $20 trillion by the end of this year, which is a very huge amount. And finally, I want to talk about how the pandemic situation united most of the countries. Since COVID-19 is a global crisis, of course, all countries are aware of this. And to give an example from my expert area, defense industry, there is absolutely no tolerance for delays in defense industry. In case of delay due to a local event, local thing, you should write force majeure and explain it in detail. And in most of the cases, you get a negative answer. They say, we do not accept your force majeure. But in this case, since there is a global crisis in the current situation, when you report the delays, even with a phone or mail, a solution can be found easily, without some written notices even. And to conclude, I need to mention that governments should not focus only on the short term, and longer term priorities must be included in the immediate response measures. And we need to keep in mind that the issue of international cooperation and government relations has to go to a new opening in the health axis. Countries that previously cooperated with economic interests, terrorism, and political issues should now be in common harmony and cooperation in the field of health. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for your very, very brief and very professional introduction, I would say, to our panel. As a moderator, I want to change the system of our statements, our speeches. I want first all our participants explain their ideas, and then we can discuss together. And I have a special request to all the audience: not be shy, not be timid. You should be involved to the process of the questioning of the discussion, because you know that this is a unique opportunity to ask what is going on in the world and to ask what will be the, you said, pandemic, post-pandemic. I actually don't know when will be the world after pandemic, because we are actually in pandemic, but the understanding the role and the place of international relations and the international government relations, GR sector, is very important. That's why we have a unique opportunity to discuss about this. Mr. Kendall Coffey, during the first panel, said that he never used Zoom. I also never used Zoom because I accustomed to use Skype mostly, you know. But now I think the situation has changed. We changed, but we should use both Zoom and social networking, I think. So the next panelist, Mr. Eyup Vural Aydin, please.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here and sharing information about public-private partnership in Turkey. Actually, I am the chairman of Istanbul PPP Center of Excellence, which is focusing on the public-private partnership infrastructure investment in Turkey. Maybe I would like to share some perspective of private partners involving public services in my speech. It's a political culture in Turkey, working with private party. It's not so new. So maybe from the 11th century, Turkish government, paradoxically, we have a very strong government culture, but the Turkish government is very familiar to working with private parties from 11th century. So maybe last 30 years, what happened in Turkey from the perspective of PPP projects, we have reached 252 PPP projects, mostly in the energy, transport, and healthcare. Those are the public services. And the amount of PPP projects in the last 30 years reached $150 billion, which invested by MDBs like World Bank, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, IFC. So it's a very common global investment climate in Turkey last 30 years. And last 15 years, from 252 PPP projects, we have 150 projects which focused on transport, infrastructure, especially in healthcare. So from the nature of partnership, actually, if we are talking about PPP projects, public-private partnership projects, from the nature, there is a very huge, very strong relation between private and the public side. So how we are handling this partnership, it's kind of marriage, like because you are contracting for 25 years, 30 years, so how you will manage this relation, this is very important, and we are talking about some solid, concrete money, investment, so funding. So those things, those are very important to handle this kind of partnership. So it's a very huge challenge. During the pandemic, so you know, like a marriage, it's a random day, no problem. But if it's a crisis, who acts, who trades the other one? So this is the problem. So the pandemic, last 2 years, what happened in the partnership? Because we are talking about some guarantees that the public, for the public services, which will be operated by the private party, should be guaranteed by the public side. So the public should pay something to give some guarantees for those projects, transport, healthcare, energy, and other things. So what happened? Paradoxically, for the transport project, because of the lockdown, restriction, limitation, the limitation of the mobilization of the people and the goods, the numbers of users on the transport project decreased very radically, very strongly. So, but still the government should pay for those guarantees. And paradoxically, in the healthcare projects, like city hospital, which are very huge in Turkey, more than 1,000 beds, 2,000 beds, 3,000 beds, which cost $1.2 billion, the user of the hospital, which are the patients, increased dramatically. So in both sides, the government should pay one side more and the other side give the guarantee that the people didn't use. So it's a very good experience for us because, you know, when you look at the PPP projects globally, which are the most successful countries like UK, Australia, Canada, States, you can see some failures. But in Turkey, the PPP project started, I mean the operational phase, it was 2015, and now we reached the 6th year, and so it's going well. During the pandemic, maybe I don't want to waste your time, I know because I have 5 or 6 minutes, but during the pandemic, what happened? Because it's a very big challenge to handle this relation between private and the public side. So firstly, the government called the private parties and the investors, because they funded by the MDBs, so it's a global perspective. The government called the investors and the operators and how we can deal, how we can renegotiate on this pandemic process. So it means that the communication between the parties is the most important point, those crises. If the government would like to use force majeure issues, or the private party would like to use force majeure issues on that time, it could be a catastrophic relation between private and the public. But luckily, last year and this year, the government and the private parties somehow deal, and the guarantees paid by the government, but some extra and more charges, fees, which issued by the private party, didn't request it from the government. So it's kind of good negotiation between those two big powers. So it was maybe it's a political culture that they are familiar. I mean, the private party is familiar working with the public services and the public side, and the government is very familiar to work with the private party in Turkey. So we didn't have a very big problems during these pandemic times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eyup. it's a good that we don't have problems. I think it means that the political system is quite stable, you know. It's very good because I think that the countries with a stable political system and with a strong foreign policy, they always attracts the attention of other countries to understand what is going on inside. That's why I want to ask Tim Schellberg what is going on in lobbying practices and process in the US, because we don't know the new trends and prospects of your country. Because, for example, 2 years ago, Rudy Giuliani came in Ukraine. He came a lot of times, and we regarded Rudy Giuliani as the best and the symbol of GR sector in the United States. But now, 2 years later, he has problems with FBI, he has problems with law. So he did something wrong, I think. What can you advise, and what are the practice and trends now in the United States, despite all the problems, and after Trump era, I would say?
So there was a little bit miscommunication on what I was to prepare for on this, and I didn't. So I'll address some of that, but maybe since I have 10 minutes, maybe I talk about the things I prepared for. But I'm going to start with a story of that in lobbying and government relations, eventually every company or interest, civil society or corporate, will eventually need a lobbyist, even if they don't know they do. And when I was getting out of the university in 1987, I wanted to get into lobbying, and I'm from Seattle, and I thought, oh, there's a big new company developing in Seattle, and it's called Microsoft. And I decided to send a letter to Bill Gates. And I wrote a letter, and I said, I'm graduating from university, I want to be a lobbyist, and I want to be a lobbyist for Microsoft. I get a letter back about a month later from Bill Gates. And it says, we are in the computer business, we do not lobby. And of course, 8 years later, the Justice Department was trying to destroy Bill Gates' company because it was a monopoly, and we're trying to dissolve it. And up until recently, Microsoft had the biggest lobbying budget in the United States. So I missed out on my calling because I was just a few years too early requesting a job. So, I think I'm going to first start with just kind of giving you what I did prepare for, is to explain the project that we work on that is a story of how you can be an effective lobbying entity when you're not engaged in actual relationship lobbying. So how do you work with civil society and other groups to impact change in legislation and policy when you're not actually in there meeting with the ministry and the Congress to affect change? You're using others. And we have this opportunity. We took on a project about 20 years ago to become experts in the area of what we call forensic DNA databasing. The idea, of course, is when you have a crime, you can take DNA from a crime scene and you could put it into a database and find out who your suspect is, because the government has a policy to collect DNA from everybody convicted or arrested from a crime. And this is an amazing policy because in the United Kingdom, which has the oldest one, if you have a rape in London and you put the DNA from the rape into the United Kingdom database, 65% of the time you're going to identify who the rapist is. But to have this, you need legislation, you need policy, you need budget, you need SOPs, all these things. And we have interests that don't want to do relationship lobbying. So how can we affect that change in policy when you're not able to do relationship lobbying? And so we developed a program that basically put together an idea of influencer network of developing stakeholders, developing PR, developing all these other methods of lobbying without actually going out and meeting with the politicians. And it's been an amazing experience. And when we started, there were only 12 countries in the world that had these database policies and legislation in place. And today, after 20 years of work in our group, we now have 60 countries that have this policy. And it comes in different forms. In South Korea, we did that project in 2007. The way we did it there is we had the US Embassy help us get meetings with the correct officials. We compiled all the examples from the other countries in the world that had this with data and simply just presented it to them. And they took that and they built their own program on that, and off they went and passed the legislation the next year. In Brazil, in 2013, our approach was simply to work with civil society. There was a family of crime victims who were, all their daughters and mothers were victims of a serial killer. And if the Congress in Brazil would have passed that law a few years earlier, all 5 of those women would still be alive. So we basically met with them and we gave them all the information of how to argue for the bill, how to deal with privacy concerns, gave them the strategies. And that civil society rose up and passed that legislation in Brazil, and that's how it worked there. In India, if any of you have ever worked in India, it's true. It's the world's biggest democracy, and it is impossible to figure out government relations in India because it's so big. And so our method there was simply to bring it to the public, from the public up to the politicians. So we developed PR campaigns. PR campaigns to show, how big is the rape problem in India, and to get people talking about it and to complain and develop this groundswell from the public and civil society. And that caused the India Parliament to introduce and start moving the bill forward. And many times, because we're experts in this area, we just get approached. I had a call 2 weeks ago from the Ministry of Interior in Poland that wants to change its DNA database program. And because we're experts and they know we have all this information, they reach out to us and we provide it. And so it's this information expertise approach that really succeeds. So really, I guess, is the lesson is that when you don't have, when you can't do relationship lobbying, because one, maybe you can't afford it, it's expensive, we're highly paid professionals that are, sometimes it's hard to pay for relationship lobbying, or you have a company that doesn't want to engage in relationship lobbying because of optic issues. There's other ways to affect legislation and public policy, and it's through civil society, it's through expertise, it's developing stakeholders, and creating those public awareness strategies. So we have to think of it when you're developing government relations in your country, think of both the relationship lobbying approaches and also these other ways to get change in public policy. So sorry that's not exactly what you asked me to say, but I was scheduled for 10 minutes and I had prepared something else, but I'm happy to talk about Rudy Giuliani and other people if you'd like.
Thank Tim, for your explaining the situation concerning the accurate cases of lobbying. You know that we have representatives participate from Kazakhstan, for example, and in this year I was in Belarus and was in Tajikistan, I was in Kazakhstan. I compare all post-Soviet countries. I understand that how far we, even Ukraine and the other countries, how far from the real system of lobbying, I would say. Because due to Katya Odarchenko, to other our lawyers, lobbyists, we try to build such kind of system, but it's, we need time to understand and then to build, I would say. You know that the unique role of, I would say, of media is recognized in the lobbying system, and today we have Sitara Jabeen, who represents the biggest TV station, TV media of Turkey, Turkey Radio Television, TRT, TRT. 2 weeks ago, I gave the interview to this channel, yeah, but for Arabic version, because I cooperate actually with TRT. That's why I'm very glad that we have today the representatives of such kind of influential media. However, the question concerns the citizen lobbying and advocacy. So, is it possible to say that there is such kind of lobbying of citizens? Because we are used to lobby the economical interests, companies? What is the situation with the citizens, ordinary citizens?
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here. As someone who worked a lot in humanitarian organizations and in the field and now in digital space, I have had the opportunity to interact with young people, who use social media like almost for a living, and some of my young friends, millennials, also say that they live on social media. Working in journalism now, 20 years ago, if you wanted to be a journalist, you needed a certain qualification, you needed a certain experience to become a journalist. But today you have, 4 years ago when I came to Turkey, one of the first things I saw on social media was a 10-year-old girl from Palestine, Jana Jihad, who was reporting live from Palestine. And she was called as the youngest journalist in the world. And then you have someone like Tim Pool in the US, for example, who is a high school dropout, but he started reporting live the events in the US and then internationally as well. And he's got a massive following, even though he is not professionally qualified as a journalist. But these lines have blurred so much. And then lobbying is another of those areas which is now so much decentralized that most of the governments and even some professional lobbying firms don't even grasp the extent of it. For example, the cradle of citizen lobbying is North America, but even in that region, if you look at the laws, and we have talked about the laws a lot, so I wouldn't go into the details, but if you talk about the laws concerning lobbying practices and advertisement and advocacy or marketing in every country, there are quite a few of those, especially in the developed part of the world. But even those laws are not up to speed when it comes to citizen lobbying, because a lot of the governments still do not understand how it is affecting different issues and how it impacts public opinion and stuff like that. One aspect of citizen lobbying that I particularly want to emphasize, but before coming to that, Tim mentioned India, and he quoted an example from India and how you did some lobbying about rape. One of my friends in India, Lakshmi Agarwal, she is, maybe you have known her already, she is an acid survivor, and she single-handedly lobbied about this free sale of acid in India, and got a Supreme Court ruling which bans it. Not that it prevents it 100%, but at least she managed to mobilize the public opinion to get that done. So this is an example of how influential and how impactful citizen lobbying can be. But at the same time, governments, especially when they think of citizen lobbying, their attitude is almost the same as it was a few years ago towards citizen journalism, that, oh, we don't take it seriously. You just have some kids, they have their phones and they, they post from somewhere and they just send some photos on Instagram, and that doesn't mean journalism. But that has changed, and the same is happening in lobbying. Now, today you have young people who, talking about the laws and the legal framework of any country, governments don't even know how some of these people are writing fake reviews online, and how they are, and it's called astroturfing. And astroturfing is something which, which is like a fake representation of something. Like an elite campaign could be masqueraded as a mass or grassroots campaign through astroturfing. What happens is that you just pay some individuals who have, who are very digital savvy and they've got a big digital footprint, and they can generate a whole conversation about something which is not even a mainstream point, but it may look like it is. And in the US, I read some time ago that a company was fined, I think, $5 million in 2018 for using a lobbying firm, which is an AstroTurf lobbying firm. So it's not that it only happens at the level of individuals, but there are lobbying firms which are engaging in astroturfing, and governments find it really hard to understand and work around it. And for, when it comes to the individuals, most of the times, these citizen lobbyists who genuinely lobby and stand up for a cause and an issue, and they give it their heart and soul, but even they get played by these astroturfing people that exist between those citizens and the governments, that they manipulate public opinion in a way. Like, for example, there are front groups which make it look like a minority opinion is actually the opinion of a majority. And they do so by just masking their sources, like who is sponsoring their campaigns and where this money is coming from. And for these young people, it's just like, oh, if you post a review about this product online, you get paid whatever. And there are so many young people who are doing affiliate marketing today, and it's borderline. I mean, it's hard to assess at what point they get manipulated and at what point they are genuinely talking about a certain product or a certain issue or even digital products. They get paid by the number of posts you make a day or the number of reviews. And they say that almost 1/3 of the reviews on the internet are fake. There are fake blogs, and there are entire networks which sometimes are even run by the governments. I mean, you need organizations like the EU Disinfo Lab, for example, which actually does quite some meticulous work when it comes to busting this kind of astroturfed hype that is created either by the governments or by some lobbying firms. And but most of all, I think governments, more than the lobbying firms or the professionals in this area, need to understand how social media works and how do they bring their laws up to speed for it. Because at the end of the day, you would never be able to follow individually every citizen who now has a phone and is a lobbyist or can become a lobbyist at any point. What you need is mechanism and strategies, and those don't exist at this point, pretty much. So I actually have more questions than answers, I would say. I wanted to ask all of you that do you think that your governments are agile enough, or are they paying enough attention to this issue? And what are they really doing to especially control astroturfing, which I believe, because the thing is that when individuals or a group of aggrieved citizens get manipulated, then it threatens the legitimacy of even the genuine lobbying that they do, that some of them do. And it does so much damage to the whole practice of authentic, genuine, good-willed lobby, that at the end of the day, it, for example, if you see that a cause is manipulated to the point that it loses the trust of people, then it's very hard to gain their trust back for a genuine cause. And people would just question it more than pay attention to the issue even. So this, I think, is a question that I would really like to ask all of you, and yeah, we look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Sitara, you gave a little bit humanity to our.
I'm a humanitarian worker at heart. I've always been and always will be.
Yeah, thank you indeed. Next panelist will be Liron Edery, because Teodora Migdalovichi will be online in 15 minutes. And I also to inform you that we have one additional panelist, Mrs. Tetyana Ramus. She will be after Liron Edery, I think in 30 minutes, and she will share her experience of Ukrainian promotion projects in media sphere. But I gave you a little bit information about new panelists a little bit later. So now, Mr. Liron Edery, I knew this person very good. We managed several interviews concerning the situation in the Middle East. That this topic was very actual during the last 2 weeks. However, we cooperate with Liron Edery for more than 1 year in different fields, and I would say I want to say that Mr. Liron Edery, despite that he came in Ukraine from Israel, he knows Ukraine very good. He knows how to work, how to communicate with Ukrainians, with representatives of different nations, with civil society. So this is a unique person who can share his experience and his vision in working in Ukraine. Mr. Liron Edery, please.
Спасибо большое. Чуть иронично, что я первый спикер на русского языка, но все бывает в жизни. Я готовил целый вопрос по тому, что я занимаюсь, но поскольку что мы только что еще обсуждаем вопрос о лоббизме, я хотел просто просветить этого вопроса чуть-чуть с другого стороны. Наверное, мы должны подумать чуть-чуть, почему такое огромное государство, как Соединенные Штаты Америки, имеет только два партии, демократическую и республиканскую, и непонятно мне и другими, наверное, сколько лоббистских групп крутится вокруг Конгресса. А в другую сторону, в нашей стране, в Украину, сколько партий есть? Я не говорю в парламенте, вообще существует регистрированные десятки, сотни. И сколько? 350, да? А лоббистских групп запрещена. Почему так происходит? У меня есть мой ответ. Это моя видение. Вопрос, кто стоит в центре внимания. Человек или система? Какая-либо система, которая есть. Когда человек в центр, то ему не надо 500 партий, ему нужен свой конгрессмен и доступ к остальным через лоббизм. Он подходит и стучит и просит. Или требует, угрожает в следующее голосование. А когда система в центре внимания, то и ей удобно получить просьбы тихо в комнате и не шумно на улице. И может быть это есть центр вопросов, которые тут задали тоже других вопросов, других людей. Почему пытаются манипулировать, как пытаются манипулировать нас через масс-медиа, через телевидение, через другими. Еще раз вопрос. Всегда будут попытаться манипулировать. Это часть политической игры, это часть жизни. Отсюда никогда невозможно убегать. Это нормальная система работы по всему миру. Всегда это было. Это человеческий фактор. Но еще раз вопрос, насколько позволяет индивидуальный человек проявить себя. Насколько мы хотим давать ему достучать к верхней власти. Наверное, это и есть главный вопрос. Поэтому отсюда наверное, двойственные мои законы, которые я бы хотел, мечтал получить. Это первый касается к образованию. Я считаю, что в Украине провели замечательную реформу по образованию. Я считаю ее замечательной, лучше, чем была раньше. Но в этом системе просто забитая. Она отсутствует. Индивидуальное образование. Вот это на индивидуальных детей, которые должны особое внимание. По разных наклонностям или по разных причинам. И будь это национальных причин. Она просто, вот этот вопрос просто не обсуждено вообще в новой реформе. И когда мы говорим об этом, как будто бы никто не замечал, что есть там вопрос. То есть индивидуальный инвалид, у него нет, то есть нет ответа, куда он идет. Нету запись электронной, как будто бы все дети в Украину, все спортсмены. И все могут ходить в окрестности рядом с домом без никаких нужды. Это если это национальная идентификация, то есть У него нету школы где-то вдали, в которой он хочет идти и должен идти туда. А он должен идти где-то поблизи, как будто бы все школы вокруг него дают ему ту информацию. И также по информации, которую школа преподает, она никак не адаптирует себе к нужды людей, которые учатся в ней. Так же самое, когда мы говорим, и может быть это и корень проблем, и корень вопрос, не проблем. История Украины. Я, может быть, не все будут соглашаться или будут довольны, но я скажу это. У меня есть в школе. Один из предметов в школе – это я и Украина. Вы знаете, что никогда евреев не существовали в Полтавской области? Никогда. Вы, наверное, слышали об этом, да? Никогда. Одесса никогда не были евреи. Ну, не странно ли вам? Не странно ли вам, что есть много села, которые вообще созданы евреями? Я не говорю сейчас о других национальностях, их есть тоже. То есть не странно ли вам, что мы преподаем того, что не есть? Поймите, говорили тут о Палестине, о Израиле, конфликт. Я жил в городе, который называется Мигдал-Эмек. Мы знали, нас преподавали, что это был арабский город на имя Мигдал. Израиль при войне до сих пор. Но никто не смел думать, что он должен вычеркивать историю. Можно комментировать, можно спорить, можно обсуждать, но не вычеркивать ее. И, наверное, пока мы не взрослеем у себя в Украину, а я считаю себе, что сознательно в моей жизни с 20 лет и дальше прожить в Украину, пока мы не взрослеем, смотреть на себя в зеркало, позволять друг другу выражать себе своими мыслями, мы не достучим к индивидуальной власти. Мы будем бояться его. Потому что когда мы будем выражать индивидуально, мы будем бояться, что другой будет на нас нападать. По моему мнению, это не совсем здорово. И поэтому лоббизм будет нам сложно создать. Спасибо.
Thank you. Спасибо, Liron. Thank you for your very sincere speech, as usual, actually. And now I want to represent you. I will represent shortly in Russian, then translate to English, and then I will give the word to Mrs. Tetyana Ramus. She will present her speech in Russian language. Tetyana Ramus is Tetyana Ramus, я думаю, многие знают, кто в Украине телевизор смотрит хоть периодически. На самом деле Tetyana Ramus уже очень много проектов сделала, связанных с продвижением важных социальных проектов, а не только проектов, я помню, еще в 2009-2010 году на телевидении было очень много программ, связанных с вопросами защиты детей. Потом вот в 2019 году новый проект появился «Белая стричка», правильно? Да, да, об этом мы расскажем. Нам, собственно, всем передали бренд этого проекта. Персона, которая не нуждается в представлении, честно скажу, для тех, кто интересуется, по крайней мере, украинским медиарынком. И я сейчас кратко перейду на английский язык. Tetyana Ramus is a very, very famous person in the media sphere in Ukraine. She supported and promoted a lot of projects during last decade, actually, last 10 years, concerning the defense of rights and support of the rights of the children. She tried always to combine the politics and the social sphere, and now you see the proof of the brand, actually, of her last activity, last project. This is White Ribbon, it calls in English. So actually, Tetyana will represent herself. Пожалуйста, Tetyana, пожалуйста.
Работает, да? Здравствуйте, я приветствую всех участников форума. Спасибо Катерине Одарченко, которая пригласила и которая не безразлична таким социально важным темам, как защита прав женщин. Я действительно работала очень долгие годы журналистом и занималась социальными темами. Вот сейчас как раз на экране вы видите мое интервью в Лос-Анджелесе с Джиной Дэвис, удивительная женщина, оскароносная актриса, которая основала Институт гендерного равенства в средствах массовой информации. То есть вообще для многих, наверное, это какая-то новая совершенно идея, но это был 2011 или 2010 год. Вот. И она сказала, что если в США мы будем заниматься вопросами гендерного равенства, то мы достигнем его через 250 лет, если нет, то через 500. Вот. Еще тогда меня эта тема заинтересовала, но до белой ленты было далеко. Вот. Белая лента появилась в моей жизни благодаря вот этой женщине Веронике Мудро, которую вы видите на экране. Вот. Она первая женщина, которая получила убежище в США от семейного насилия. И, в общем-то, она и начала адаптировать в Украине организацию «Белая лента». Это самая крупная инициатива мужчин по защите прав женщин от гендерного неравенства и в поддержку гендерного равенства и против насилия и дискриминации. Я хотела немножко рассказать о том, чем мы сейчас занимаемся и какие у нас взаимодействия идут с органами власти и как мы к этому, в общем-то, пришли. Значит, «Белая лента» появилась в Украине в 2014 году после событий революции достоинства. И два филиала сразу, два офиса появилось в США, в Вашингтоне, в Лос-Анджелесе и в Нью-Йорке, который как раз возглавляет Вероника Мудро, ну и в Киеве, где я являюсь амбассадором, и, скажем так, моя компания Eyup Vural Aydin, как социально активный бизнес, поддержала эту инициативу. И вот что мы сделали за эти годы, и кто откликнулся, и насколько наша страна, в принципе, готова обсуждать эти вопросы. Потому что вообще мужчины, а здесь я смотрю, большинство мужчин очень часто воспринимают «Белую ленту» как организацию против мужчин. Вот прям такая всегда реакция. Не надо быть против мужчин. Нет, на самом деле защищать свои права, это не значит быть против, да? То есть это защищать свои права. Каждый из нас в той или иной сфере защищает свои права. И в 2017 году «Белая лента» провела акцию в парламенте Украины по поддержке закона о криминализации домашнего насилия. И в 2018 году «Белая лента» разработала адженду новой гендерной политики Украины 2030 под названием «Равенство мужчин и женщин. Ключ к росту ВВП Украины», которая является системным подходом к созданию структуры гендерной политики в Украине с учетом важных экономических показателей прироста ВВП в результате увеличения экономической активности женщин. Эта адженда была презентована в Киеве и в Вашингтоне во время проведения украинских дней в Конгрессе в США. А в 2018 году наша организация поддержала серию законопроектов Министерства юстиции Украины «Чужих детей не бывает», касающихся системы уплаты алиментов и воспитанию детей в неполных семьях. А в 2019 году наша организация уже поддержала общественную инициативу по разработке нового законопроекта про семейный киднеппинг по урегулированию кражи детей одним из родителей. Вот я сейчас хочу такой вот важный аспект затронуть, который, как вам, может быть, сейчас покажется, Украину не касается, но это не совсем так. И как раз история Вероники Мудрой, которую я не буду сегодня рассказывать, я думаю, что если кого-то это заинтересует, вы о ней узнаете, но она как раз стала жертвой обстоятельств, определенных моментов и законов, которые сейчас будут дорабатываться. Итак, помимо активного сотрудничества с законодательной властью, «Белая лента» проводит совместные акции с Национальной полицией Украины при поддержке посольств Канады и США. И на данный момент «Белая лента» активно продвигает проект реформирования Гаагской конвенции в аспекте домашнего насилия. Это международная реформа, защищающая детей в случае вынужденной эмиграции в результате домашнего насилия, и поддерживается университетом Беркли в Калифорнии и «Белой лентой» США. Мы открыты к сотрудничеству в этом направлении. Вот то, о чем я говорила, так как Гаагская конвенция – это международный правовой акт, действующий в 107 странах. То есть это может коснуться и Украину, и как раз вот Веронику Мудру это тоже коснулось. И для продвижения этой реформы «Белая лента» США недавно инициировала проект съемки короткометражного адвокационного фильма для визуализации конгрессменам и сенаторам остроты проблемы иммигрантов по программе защиты от домашнего насилия. Вот как бы это то направление, которое мы делаем совместно с «Белой лентой» США и «Белая лента» Украины. Теперь то, что касается социальной активности и социальной ответственности бизнеса. Ну, безусловно, как бы каждый из нас занят своим направлением в бизнесе, и, в принципе, на такие аспекты, как домашнее насилие и гендерное равенство, ну, в нашей стране пока что обращается в последнюю очередь. То есть есть какие-то прецеденты, но в основном мы заняты не этим. Я, как учредитель своей компании, как журналист, моя компания, она вообще занимается на сегодняшний день производством товаров. При поддержке моей компании организация «Белая лента» сделала очень важный шаг и разработала первое в Украине мобильное приложение White Ribbon UA. Это приложение работает, оно еще не работает, мы его запускаем для жертв домашнего насилия. Это приложение было разработано на основе первого в Восточной Европе мобильного приложения ZTEP для жертв домашнего насилия, созданного Эвелиной Чоевой. Мы адаптировали это приложение в Украине и, создав необходимое средство личной безопасности, доступное абсолютно всем со своего смартфона, и в экстренных случаях домашнего насилия либо гендерной дискриминации приложение White Ribbon UA уже доступно в этой версии в Apple Store и в Google Play. И предоставляет ресурсы для помощи жертвам домашнего насилия, возможность сообщения в службу быстрого реагирования и записи доказательств гендерно обусловленного насилия и дискриминации. Это первая в Украине мобильная платформа White Ribbon UA, объединяющая для защиты в случаях домашнего насилия, и она будет презентована на национальном уровне в этом году. На данный момент мы ведем диалог с Министерством внутренних дел, с Департаментом информатизации. Им очень понравилась эта идея, потому что одна из наших задач организации «Белая лента» – это информирование. Я как журналист знаю не понаслышке, что огромное количество трагедий, плачевных результатов происходит именно в силу того, что не информированы как женщины, так и мужчины, а также дети. Вот как раз Джина Дэвис, она запускала в Америке программу для маленьких девочек, для того, чтобы было четкое понимание вообще, кто я в этом мире. Это вот то, что вы говорили про образовательную программу, то, что немаловажно. Поэтому приложение, которое мы адаптируем в Украине, оно будет нести не только характер некой службы безопасности, да, для жертв насилия, но и как информационный портал. Мы открыты к сотрудничеству со всеми большими компаниями, потому что я считаю, что моральное состояние сотрудников, да, оно на самом деле напрямую связано с той атмосферой, в которой находится непосредственно человек. Вот. И на сегодняшний день у нас даже вот есть кейсы, когда девушка, которая отбывает срок наказания, ее обвинили в растрате имущества компании на достаточно небольшую сумму, которая не предполагает собой отбывание срока наказания. И вынесли 4 года лишения свободы, у нее остался маленький ребенок, муж ее подал на развод. И на сегодняшний день она уже не может защитить свои права, потому что причинно-следственные связи заключались в том, что у нее возникло некорректное поведение на работе со стороны ее начальника, но она не знала, куда жаловаться, потому что полиция в данном случае бессильна. Я делала ряд семинаров, и это одно из моих направлений как амбассадора «Белой ленты». Мы сотрудничаем и с большим бизнесом, и со спортсменами, и с национальной полицией Украины, и с разными министерствами на предмет информирования. То есть мы проводим семинары, где мы рассказываем о том, как можно защитить свои права. Поэтому еще раз повторяю, что мы открыты к сотрудничеству с юридическими компаниями, с большим бизнесом, который тоже нуждается в том, чтобы проводить такие профилактические семинары, и как можно больше мужчин и женщин образовывались в этом направлении. И опять же, почему важно образование? Потому что есть восприятие таких организаций, как организации против мужчин. Опять же, защищать свои права – это не значит быть против. Вот и история этой девушки, она могла бы закончиться совершенно по-другому. Она как раз рассказывала об этом, потому что она не знала, куда жаловаться и к кому обращаться. Очень часто те случаи, которые происходят, они не попадают под прямую норму закона, и для этого нужно определенное разъяснение. Я надеюсь, что наше приложение, оно на самом деле поможет с помощью специалистов, с которыми мы хотели бы сотрудничать и открыты к сотрудничеству, для того, чтобы не доводить до вот таких вот ситуаций. Спасибо вам большое за внимание. Если у вас возникнут какие-то вопросы, я с удовольствием на них отвечу. Ну, вот кому-то дали из вас буклеты, вы можете почитать, ознакомиться. Спасибо.
Thank you. Спасибо, Татьяна. Thank you. For me, it was very interesting to hear your experience of networking. I would say of installing the cooperation between government and civil society concerning the resolving such kind of cases, which you explained and showed. It was very interesting because we actually don't have a lot of success in Ukraine concerning the cooperation between government and civil society or citizen lobbyism like we heard before. It was very interesting. I think it's a new sphere, new sector, new branch where we should work much more than we have now, I think. So we have 25 or 20 minutes. I propose the next conclusion of our panel. Now we have one more speaker, Teodora Migdalovichi, and after her speech we have, I think, 10 minutes for questions, and then we will go to lunch. So if Teodora is online, Neil. Is she ready? If not, we can.
Yes, she opened her presentation.
We can. Actually, we partly discussed some questions concerning the new lobbyists, brands, companies, and talent to complement official institutions in the new media era. It's very interesting to hear the
Do you manage to hear me?
Yeah, Teodora. We hear you.
All good?
Teodora, hi.
Everything's fine. Do you manage to hear me?
Yes,
see my screen?
we're all ready to hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. So,
Teodora, I have already explained to the audience, to the participants, the topic of your speech. We actually touched some questions which you're going to introduce, because we have here the panelists, the lobbyists from Turkey, from United States, in the future of GR sector, of lobbyism, and the new brands in media sphere. They're very interesting. So, Teodora, can you present your vision of the current situation? And you can start, actually, despite, did you hear us or no?
I hear you well. So your question was related to the future of lobby, right? Yeah, so basically my presentation, it's around this topic. Actually, for those that are passionate about art, you know that May You Live in Interesting Times was the headline of Venice Biennale 2 years ago. And, you know, for Asians, May You Live in Interesting Times, it's a curse. While for Westerners, such an expression is associated with a blessing, because, you know, what's interesting, it's exciting, it's exhilarating, and it's something that triggers us as culture. And I think was never a better headline for the times we live now, also for the lobby industry, because since 2008, since the crisis we had in 2008, the whole tectonic plates of society, of macroeconomics are changing and switching places, and new words are emerging. And while old structures are kind of challenged and put aside, new ones are emerging, and of course this is available for the lobby industry as well. And in my view, lobby nowadays goes far beyond very discrete and influential entities that are vouching for big corporations. It's all about a far bigger picture, and much more entities, both individuals or contemporary brands, are lobbying for a variety of topics that never used to be a relevant subject for the lobbyists before, for the classical lobbyists before. And there is this anthropologist, there is this anecdote of an anthropologist, American anthropologist, asking her students about what's the very first sign of civilization. And of course the students replied, it's about the invention of the wheel, or it's about the invention of writing. And she said, actually no, the very first sign of civilization, it's a femur that was broke and healed. And I think the times we are living now are very similar to that point in time in the evolution of humanity, because we manage to stay a little bit, take our breath, look at the problems the world has, and we do our best. Every single one of us actually becomes a lobbyist for far bigger causes than our immediate interest. And if you look, at contemporary brands, what contemporary brands are doing, you already have an answer, because there are so many brands fighting and vouching for and lobbying for causes that were not necessarily in their direct interest. And that's the sign of, a very advanced society. Yeah. So that's my answer. Actually, your question was part of my presentation almost.
Thank you, Teodora. So we have 10 or 15 minutes for the audience. I ask the audience, the participants, to be much more active, and I think you have maybe some examples, some cases, some interesting cases, or you just want to precise some information. It's a good opportunity to ask questions in Russian or in English or Ukrainian language, and we will introduce them. Who will ask the first questions? Katerina?
Yeah, I have. First questions is to our Turkish partners. So firstly, as I understand right, you haven't regulation about lobbying. Do you have draft laws, maybe in some session of parliament? Because as I know, you have 600 members of parliament, so maybe one of 600 also have draft law about lobbying. So it's my first question. And second, it's connected to first question. If you have majority and if you have so strong president, the main object of lobbying is president's office. Is I understand right this position? So maybe somebody can orient me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But please help with microphones. Yeah.
What?
I had some experience on demonstrations, so I can't without microphone.
In fact, the two terms are always a negative impact, meaning for Turks, for ordinary Turks, for public managers or the citizens, the lobby and the diaspora, because they are all affiliated with the activities of, in terms of lobbying, is the amount of contribution you make to the you can affirm or citizen can make to the presidential campaign. This is the only regulation I remember, I know. In terms of the who are going to lobby, in the classical system, the executive bureaucracy is very much strong, and you need to lobby to them, if you want to change the regulation or amendment, make a new law introduction to a new unregulated business. But now we changed the political system now from a Turkish-style parliamentarian democracy to Turkish-style executive presidential model. Now presidential palace is more important than the bureaucratic chains of the line ministers.
Yeah, and second, my question is connected with the first question. It's about most active sectors of lobbying. So, for example, maybe it's yeah. And second question is connected to first question. It's about cases and sectors. So, what sectors it's most active on your point of view? Maybe it's measuring on budgets, or it's measuring on activities. What sector is more active? So it's energy sector or infrastructure sector or maybe civil society sector, and how you can measure this? Yeah.
Actually, the answer is the part of my presentation in the afternoon, but I can briefly say that it is not a registered business like the United States and some Western European countries. So we don't know who is spending for what, but we all know that especially big holding companies spend lots of money for the political campaigns of the political parties or candidates, or at least the mayors, local elections. It's a big business itself. But I can say that the strictly regulated industries spend more on the lobbying and government relations activities. There are some businesses are very much controlled by the government through very strict regulations like energy, pharma and medical, banking, defense, communication. Those type of business are regulated by the government and through independent regulatory authorities.
I see, thanks. Maybe someone else also can have ideas about it. Yeah, help us, please. Thank you.
Actually, as Mustafa mentioned, it's not a registered business in lobbying in Turkey, but actually for the pharmaceutical sector, energy sector, transportation sector, in the assembly, if some regulation will be issued, generally there should be an establishment of committees, which is including by private and the parties, the public side. So this committee combine in the line ministries, under umbrella of line ministries, and the public and the private works for this committee for the regulation. So this is a very political culture in Turkey. So the private parties send their representative to the assembly or the line ministries, and they discuss before the regulation. So this is kind of not lobbying, but they can say something about what they are expecting from those regulations after the assembly issued this act.
You mean individuals like heads of companies or like individual like relatives? Can you clarify this point?
Not the individuals.
Who are these people?
Yes, those people are the representatives of those companies based in Ankara. Because the political climate is doing in Ankara, not in Istanbul, and those big companies who are invested in transportation, energy, pharmaceutical sector, so they based in Ankara, so they had a branch there, so they sent their representative in Ankara to those meetings.
But it's not government relations cell, because in other countries, for example, Imperial Tobacco, it's a famous company, everybody knows Imperial Tobacco. They have government relation director or government relations CEO who has on his responsibility contact with power, and it's like a position in company. But in Turkey it's the same, yeah?
Yes. For example, Google, Microsoft, Apple, so they all have governmental relation manager, director, executive director. And the company is not just famous Apple, Microsoft, and the other companies based in Turkey. So also they have a branch in Ankara, and they have a representative who is charging relation between governments and the company.
I see, I see. And is the association active, for example, or it's more work with Chamber of Commerce, or associations also very, very strong in Turkey?
Sure, sure. The NGOs, I mean the businessmen NGOs and the Chamber of Commerce are very, very, very strong. But from the perspective of lobbying, I think they are not doing something because the companies they are doing by themselves, not the association. Associations that generally they are expecting some requirements or some needs, some necessary regulation from the government. So it's not kind of lobby, but it's like a pressure group of on the public regulations.
Interesting point. Yeah, interesting point. Maybe someone else also wanted to add some comments about practices. Yeah, Sitara.
Yes. So, you know, again, I'll be talking about the perspective of citizen lobbyists. I'm not Turkish myself, but I'm here since 4 years. And what I have seen, especially here in Istanbul, the civil society and how, I mean, especially the issues that I see people reacting to, there's a lot of them, but what strikes me especially is that there is a lot of focus by the citizen lobbyists on domestic violence. And the other thing is that because, you know, Turkey is a country that has the largest number of refugees in the world at the moment. So there are like more than 3 million Syrian refugees, and a lot of them are here in Istanbul. So you see that a lot of the citizen lobbying focus is on issues related to you know, the war in general in the region, but especially in Syria, and refugee-related issues. I have seen quite a few times that, you know, on Instagram lives and stuff like that, you see young people who are actually refugees, but who came here at the very beginning of the Syrian war, you know, in 2010 or, no, sorry, 12. And they, at that time, they were like kids, but they kind of grew up in this society, but they have now become a part of the Turkish civil society, but at the same time, they're very active when it comes to the situation in their home country. So they, some of them have started working, they are students, but they are quite active when it comes to lobbying on, you know, humanitarian issues, the rights of refugees. Some of them have established, I mean, those who have been lucky enough to, you know, like find work and make a living for themselves, they are doing a lot of work in the sense that they want to speak up for those people who cannot, and who every now and then you see in the news that a lot of people try to go to Greece, you know, they try to enter Europe, but then some of them don't make it and then they come back. And so this issue is also quite at the focus of the Turkish civil society when it comes to lobbying.
Thank you. And one more question. Is these members of parliament in Ankara, 600, it's quite many members. Is they active as individuals or in different communication? So in communication with advocacy cases, in lobbying cases, or it's mostly communication with central office of political party? It's important, yeah.
As a political scientist by profession, I could say the primary mission of Turkish parliament is not legislation. The legislation is mostly done by the executive bureaucracy of the ministries, and now it is more on the presidential palace, internal kitchen of the presidential palace. The drafts are prepared by the ministries and the presidential office, and then sent to the committees. The contribution of the MPs or parliamentarians is mostly during the sub-technical committee meetings, which brings together the other stakeholders as well, through NGOs and other affiliated institutions related to these cases. So especially during the general sessions, there is a very limited contribution of the members of the parliament. So it's more on the executive bureaucracy instead of the parliamentarian.
But why you have so big number of people in parliament?
I mean, it's another different.
Of course, it's not about law; it's about public
culture.
administration.
But the primary mission is not unlike the United States. The draft prepared by the members of the parliament is maybe less than 1% entire Republic of history. The rest, 90% of the drafts are prepared by the ministries, comes to the goes to the cabinet, and then comes a final draft to the subcommittee, from subcommittee to the general session, and then it is approved with the support of the ruling government parties and coalition, and then published in the official newspaper of the Republic.
It's very interesting because I think that if you have some big parliament, you have many active people in committees who work on laws. So I think it's a very interesting issue that only 1% of initiative and laws developed in
the only draft prepared by, I remember over maybe 20 years, the only draft I remember prepared by the members of the parliament is this current education model. Previously it was 8+4, then a group of parliamentarians drafted their amendment. Okay, it should be 4+4+4, and then it was approved by the ruling party. Everybody knows that the minister didn't know, weren't aware of such a resolution prepared by some members of the parliament.
It happens, yeah. One more question about also Turkish experience. It's your U.S. foreign agent, so Turkish part as foreign agent. So do you active in D.C.? Maybe somebody also looking about statistics of Turkish agents in the question of military aspects, in question of some economy aspects, because in DC we can see all this data in open database of Ministry of Justice. Maybe Tim Schellberg also or Kendall Coffey knows these details about Turkish activity. And one more question, we also today will talking about interesting term as public diplomacy, and so some advocacy from countries, it's interesting point. So maybe you know about this type of activity of Turkey in US, for example, and do you often as Turkish side registered as foreign agents? Maybe somebody knows it. Andrey, можете передать микрофон дальше?
Actually, I also do not have an exact answer of this question, but I want to talk about the defense industry perspective about the lobbying side. We have many strong companies in defense industry in Turkey. Where I worked was Aselsan, and it's one of the biggest defense industry companies. And of course, all of these companies make their own lobbying activities, and it includes, of course, United States and other countries. But I'm not sure about an exact answer of your question, to be honest.
I think it's time to also create Government Relations Professionals Association in Turkey, because as I see in Turkey and Kazakhstan, we needed to build this institution, because you are top professionals here in country, but many questions can be developed. Is it a good idea for your perspective? Yeah.
One point for the public diplomacy. There is growing interest for public diplomacy activities, Turkish foreign policy making, and there are some specialized institutions, public institutions for that. There is one, Yunus Emre, it's kind of Goethe Institute or British culture of the UK. They have offices in foreign countries, teach Turkish primarily, and then other public policy activities. And there are others, some private foundations working for the public policy activities of Turkey. They are mostly in close relations with the government and the ruling party.
I see, I see. And if I can ask conclusion from Team Schellberg, maybe also some advices. I won't talk about FARA and about agents from government or defense, because it's not your sector, but about, for example, Turkish business. What can be your advice about their work in DC? And can you also explain maybe some procedure of working with foreign clients? Because it's interesting for all people all around the world. For example, if, I don't know, Ayajan wanted to represent some Kazakhs, I don't know, food production in US, and she wanted to do some lobbying with regulation, I don't know. And in European Union, it's quotas, for example, to import, maybe in US some other issues. What's the roadmap for such type of people you have from American perspective, yeah? So what's the first step, second step, and so on and so forth? Of course, it's a question not for 5 minutes, but maybe you can give some advices to us, yeah.
Okay, so I think that for foreign countries that either companies or their governments want help in Washington, D.C., the main advice is that there are, I don't know, tens of thousands of lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and there's not many people that could help you on your specific issue. You have to find the right type of person that has the experience in your issues dealing with that minister, government agency, or that congressional committee that deals with those issues. So it's, you know, what I find, we do this a lot. We go into a country and we're looking for consultants that can help us with the issue we're dealing with. And I brought up this issue of human identity, DNA, which usually deals with the ministries of interior. You have to find consultants that are aware of this issue. So I think a lot of it is internet research. You have to kind of get, most of the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. are listed on the internet. You have to find research, figure out ones that are advertising in that field of expertise. You could also look at who they've donated to and see if, you know, if their political contributions been given to the agricultural chairman of the congressional committee. It just takes a lot of time. You know, you plan a trip just to go and meet different people without committing to hiring somebody. Don't rush, be careful, be methodical. And that's my biggest advice if you're looking to go into the Washington, D.C. lobbying scene. You just have to take it all in and take your time to make sure you have the right person with the right expertise.
Yeah, but for our country, it's one more issue that people in our country like, you know, very quick results.
Yeah.
And I'm also live for a long time in Virginia near D.C., so I know quite a bit about your work, but your projects, it's like from half a year, but usually it's from 1 year work till 3 years to result. And for people from post-Soviet Union and maybe from Turkey, I don't know, we like a very quick result. And what's your advice in this mentality issue? Because maybe you also can explain a little about procedure. Because if, for example, it's budget appropriation, of course it can be, for example, for a big. Can you explain a little more? Maybe it's obvious for you, but it's not so obvious for other participants. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if you're doing budget work, it's quite predictable because it's an annual budget. So you know if I forget the exact time frames, but usually, you know if your project's going to be funded in the budget sometime in the summer. And then you know that money would be released as soon as they finalize the budget, which could be somewhere between, on October if they do it in the timeline, but usually within 3 months of that.
So it is, if you're doing budget work, it's very predictable. You know if your project is in the budget. On policy work, legislation, I mean, it's just like everywhere else. It could be years. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if it's a defense question, for example, it's also very, very tough question. Maybe Candle Coffee can add something about this issue, which connected of algorithm and also advices to Turkish lobbyists, because this industry is only developed here in Turkey, it's only developed in Kazakhstan, which we will explore in the next panel discussion, really. So maybe you also have some algorithm or advices from what it's better to start work in US. From my point of view, first point, it's start from self-due diligence process, and maybe you can also explain some more points from legal point of view. What is self-due diligence? What is lawyer work? And why with some people, Americans can't work? Because of course, if a Russian-speaking person or Ukrainian-speaking person go to internet and searching for lobbying company, they can search plenty of it. But also some people in DC, even in London, they speculate that people from other countries don't understand deeply some points, how it's work in DC, and it can be not cheating, but not effective projects. And I really know some Americans who give not effective algorithms of work in DC directly for Ukrainians, for example. So maybe you can add some points also. Microphone is there. Yeah, thanks.
Well, I certainly agree with Tim that unfortunately for things in the Congress, it's a strategy has to be a strategy of patience and timing. And I would add to that to the extent that politics is important, which it generally is, to be mindful of the fact that the U.S. is coming up for elections again in 2022. And there is some substantial possibility that one or both of the congressional houses, we have, of course, that Congress, the House, and then the U.S. Senate, could change. And so what does that mean? That could mean that a strategy that's patiently based on, for example, Democratic members of the Congress or the Senate could all of a sudden be faced with a different landscape. As we've all talked about, we do have a tremendous amount of power in the Congress and in the Senate. So that would be something I would emphasize. Different issues, of course, that's legislative. If you're dealing with sanctions, that's not a legislative process. That's within the Department of Treasury, and that would be something that a client could realistically be told. It could take a long time, but it could be a matter of months rather than a matter of years. So hopefully all of us in the process are honest enough to give realistic advice about timing. And the one thing we know about governments probably everywhere in the world is they usually don't respond more quickly. They usually take longer than we hope.